Samantha Power, the U.S. ambassador to the UN, says that the U.S. has serious doubts that the Syrian government has actually gotten rid of its cache of chemical weapons. Now, as you'll recall, Bashar al-Assad, the leader of Syria, did agree to hand over all chemical weapons and the ability to manufacture them to the UN to promote peace in the Middle East. Of course, he did so after the United States threatened to start bombing the country directly, in other words, a direct military intervention into the country. This threat of escalated violence, which they said they wouldn't do, and then said they would, and then they said they wouldn't, is what eventually forced the Syrian government to hand over their chemical weapons, which I highly argued against, that he shouldn't do so. But being that Assad does really want peace and is willing to at least make some concession, he did hand them over. The unfortunate thing is, even though he's done that, the U.S. is continuing to assert that he still has chemical weapons, and is still continuing to assert that the Ghouta region massacre that was carried out with chemical weapons actually was the Syrian government's fault, when it was found to be the opposite. We must ensure that the Syrian government destroys its remaining facilities for producing chemical weapons within the mandated timeframes and without the repeated delays by the Assad regime that plagued earlier removal efforts. Syria agreed to give up its chemical arsenal last year when President Barack Obama threatened missile strikes in retaliation for a chemical attack on a rebel-held suburb of Damascus, believed to have killed more than 1,000 people. Assad's government had denied involvement in the attack, blaming the rebels. The weapons, tons of them, were destroyed aboard a U.S. cargo vessel, MV Cape Ray, in international waters. Questions persist over whether Assad is hiding undeclared poison gases, and there is an investigation into reports of alleged chlorine gas use in some Syrian towns. Chlorine is not specifically classified as a chemical weapon. Despite this claim being made by Samantha Power on behalf of the United States, the UN has specifically said that Assad has agreed to all their demands and has handed over all their chemical weapons and all their ability to produce them, just as he said he would, just as he was asked to do. The Syrian government has fully complied with what I think is their unreasonable demand. The last of the remaining chemicals identified for removal from Syria were loaded this afternoon aboard the Danish ship Futura. Never before has an entire arsenal of a category of weapons of mass destruction been removed from a country experiencing a state of internal armed conflict, and this has been accomplished within very demanding and tight time frames. So we can definitely see by the UN's own words, those responsible for coming in and taking those chemical weapons away, that Assad has done everything they've asked him to do, and done it faster than they would have expected, and faster than anyone else has. He has been fully compliant in handing over these weapons. Now, you see the accusation by the United States here that that Assad did carry out the gas attack in Ghouta. Well, actually, it has been found not to be true. Those from the UN who were sent to investigate the incident have said otherwise. They have said it does seem like the rebels have done it, and it shows, then they did also say in their reports that there appears to be evidence tampering by the rebel side, and that there seems to be nothing wrong with what the Syrian government did, because the Syrian government made no guilty acts. Now, despite all of this, the U.S. government is still insisting that Assad has chemical weapons, even though it has been proven, bar none, that these weapons are now gone. They have been surrendered, and I think wrongfully. Now, this accusation has recently just popped up again. If you'll recall, the ISIL is now operating in the area, the organization indirectly created by the United States and being assisted by Israel. What the U.S. is concerned about now is that ISIL members may get a hold of chemical weapons inside Syria. They're afraid that some rebel movements will make it possible for them to get a hold of some of the chemical weapons that they claim he still has, and that they will end up in the hands of the ISIL. I find this actually very laughable, considering the ISIL has somewhat of a connection to the United States and is proven to have one with Israel. To me, since Assad already has handed over all these weapons, the claim is meaningless. But we know they're lying. What this is perpetuating another justification for going into the country. Thus far, the NATO forces, who are basically supporting and funding the terrorists against the Syrian government, have been unable to topple Assad. He has continued to go through all the motions as normally as he can. The government has continued to function. The people have not surrendered and turned over to the so-called rebels, the actual terrorists. The United States lost its primary justification for invading the country militarily when he handed over the chemical weapons. Now that's gone. And despite the fact that he's handed them over, the United States is still coming up with another excuse to invade the country, or to at least engage in missile strikes, now that they know their terrorist forces are losing in the country. And the government of Damascus is making great strides in defeating those same terrorists. I think what we're really seeing here is the fact that the imperialist plot against Syria is falling apart. It's over. They're basically almost on the verge of losing. You don't know exactly where they are or how close it really is. But the United States and the rest of the NATO forces do recognize that it's failing. And this is a desperate attempt to try to get another justification for continuing their hostilities against the Syrian government, even though now they're bound up with this whole huge problem that now they have to back the Syrian government against ISIS. And they've just completely ruined almost all of their plots that they were carrying out in the Middle East with this. Now they don't even know who it is that they have to trust in order to get rid of ISIS, which they themselves inadvertently created. And meanwhile, they're continuing this accusation of these chemical weapons when they've in fact already been destroyed. They've already been gotten rid of. They continue to assert he carried out the gas attack when he hadn't. And the UN inspectors and investigators went in and showed that there was no culpability by the Syrian government. In fact, there was tampering by the so-called rebels. The United States has painted itself into a very, very bad position and is now becoming more desperate in its attempt to justify invading the country. And even with all these lies about the chemical weapons, whether they've used them or have gotten rid of them, the mainstream media is completely backing them up. And in fact, it's actually very difficult to actually find the UN reports that back up the disposal of these weapons, or to find the UN reports that show that the Syrian government is not guilty of these actions. I think what we're seeing is a partial collapse, at least to some degree, of the imperialist endeavors inside the Middle East. I think this act of desperation, even though it is harmful to the government of Syria and its people, is a good sign. It shows that their plots are failing. Thank you for watching. Please comment and rate the video. If you liked it, hit subscribe or check out some of these other great videos. If you wish, share it on social media. And while you're at it, why don't you follow me on Twitter? And if you got time, go on over to the MRN bookstore and check out some of the latest books available.